Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some neighborhoods seem to struggle more with health issues like obesity than others? Well, today we're diving into a really interesting study that looks at hardship and whether it plays a role in why folks in certain areas might be more likely to face obesity. So, the big question this research wanted to answer is simple. Does living in a tough economic situation, what they call hardship, make people more likely to be obese? And if so, why? They had a hunch that maybe physical inactivity could be the middleman, the reason why hardship leads to obesity. Imagine you are looking at a whole city like Chicago, and you want to see how different neighborhoods are doing. That is kind of what an ecological design does. They took data from 75 different community areas in Chicago. They used something called the Chicago Hardship Index, which is basically a score that tells you how much economic struggle a community is facing. Think things like unemployment, low income, and crowded housing all rolled into one. Then they looked at the obesity rate, which is the percentage of adults with a BMI of 30 or higher, and how physically active people were, meaning if they reported any exercise in the past month. So, what is the snapshot of Chicago based on this data? On average, more than a third of adults were considered obese, and communities were scoring pretty high on hardship, meaning there is a good bit of economic struggle going on. And interestingly, almost 28% of adults weren't doing any physical activity in the past month. That is a good chunk of people. Now for the detective work, they ran some number crunching and the results were pretty clear. First off, they found that communities with higher hardship scores also had higher rates of obesity. So yes, hardship and obesity are linked, just like they suspected. They also saw that obesity was strongly linked to physical inactivity. That makes sense, right? If you are not moving, it is harder to maintain a healthy weight. And here is where it gets really interesting. They found that racial and gender disparities were also at play. Communities with a higher percentage of Black residents and a higher percentage of females tended to have higher rates of obesity and hardship too. Now, remember that hunch about physical inactivity being the messenger? The researchers used a special statistical tool to test this. And guess what? It worked. Physical inactivity did act as a mediator. This means that hardship doesn't just directly cause obesity. Instead, hardship makes it harder for people to be physically active. And it is this lack of activity that then contributes to obesity. They found that physical inactivity explained a good part of the link between hardship and obesity, though there was still a direct connection too. It's called partial mediation, meaning inactivity is a major piece of the puzzle, but not the only one. So, what does this all mean? Well, it aligns with an idea called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The basic idea is that before people can focus on higher level things like self-improvement or health, they need to have their basic needs met, like safe housing, steady food, and financial security. When these basic needs are struggling, it is harder to prioritize going for a run or hitting the gym. Think about it. If you are worried about paying rent or making sure your kids have enough to eat, exercising might feel like a luxury you just can't afford time or energy for. Now, no study is perfect. One of the main limitations here is that this was a cross-sectional study. That means they looked at a snapshot in time. They can say that hardship and obesity are related, but they can't definitively say that hardship causes obesity because they didn't follow people over time. Also, they relied on data that was already collected, which means they couldn't look at other factors that might be important, like access to healthy food, access to healthcare, or even chronic stress. And the physical activity data wasn't super detailed, it just asked if people did anything, not how much or how intensely. So, what are the real-world takeaways from this? It seems like simply telling people to exercise more might not be enough, especially in areas facing significant economic hardship. We need to address the root causes. Things like community gardens, which can improve access to healthy food and build community, are mentioned as a great potential intervention. Making things like bike share programs more affordable and accessible for everyone could also make a big difference. Looking ahead, this type of research opens up exciting avenues. The study highlights the usefulness of the hardship index, and future studies could use it to explore how low socioeconomic status affects other health conditions like